Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Today, the story is less about explosions on the front line and more about something that sits underneath everything else: pressure building inside Russia's system. Energy stress, political consolidation, and a war that is increasingly being fought through infrastructure, industry, and information rather than just territory. It all connects back to one thing: how long Moscow can absorb this level of strain while still projecting control. The clearest signal comes from the Kremlin itself. Vladimir Putin is now openly acknowledging that Ukraine's long range strike campaign is creating real disruption inside Russia's fuel system. He described shortages as not critical, but at the same time admitted there are queues at gas stations and regional supply problems that need direct government intervention. That's a meaningful shift. When a system built on energy dominance starts talking about shortages in public, even carefully, it tells you pressure is landing where it hurts politically, not just militarily. And this isn't happening in isolation. Ukrainian strikes have hit multiple refinery sites deep inside Russia, including facilities in Krasnodar Krai and Yaroslavl. These aren't symbolic targets. They sit in the processing and distribution layer that keeps domestic fuel moving. Fires, temporary shutdowns, and downstream disruptions are forcing Moscow into emergency coordination mode. We're talking task forces, export restrictions being considered, and rationing measures appearing in multiple regions. In some areas, drivers are being capped on daily fuel purchases. In Crimea, the situation has escalated further, with emergency conditions tied to energy and logistics strain. What matters here is the strategic pattern. Ukraine is not just trying to damage Russian military assets, it is putting pressure on Russia's internal economic rhythm. Fuel supply is one of those systems that touches everything: agriculture, transport, regional stability, and even political legitimacy in rural areas. The Kremlin is now in a reactive posture, trying to defend infrastructure that was never designed to be defended at this scale. At the same time, Putin is moving to lock down the political environment at home. At the United Russia Party Congress, he doubled down on a wartime narrative that leaves very little room for alternative interpretations of the conflict. Russia, in his framing, is unified, strong, and under external pressure, but fully capable of victory. United Russia has now formally branded itself as the President's Party, which is a notable political signal because it collapses the distance between the state, the ruling party, and Putin personally. The candidate slate for the upcoming State Duma elections reinforces that direction. You see a mix of long-standing loyalists, senior government figures, and even information space personalities aligned with the war effort. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Moscow's Mayor Sergei Sobyanin, and figures tied to state messaging all sit alongside military and media-linked individuals. The overall message is simple: wartime unity is the political system now, not just a temporary condition. On the diplomatic side, Moscow is still signaling openness to talks, but only on its terms. Putin has suggested future engagement with U.S. representatives, including figures like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, but only after what he calls the active phase of the Middle East crisis. At the same time, he is rejecting proposals that would limit long-range strikes between Russia and Ukraine. So you get this split screen. Public willingness to negotiate, paired with clear statements that core war objectives remain unchanged, including full control of multiple Ukrainian regions. Zooming out, the battlefield itself remains locked in a grinding pattern, especially in eastern Ukraine. Around Kostiantynivka, Russian forces are continuing infiltration-style attacks on the edges of the city. These are small group movements rather than large armored pushes. Think pressure testing, probing, trying to find weak points in a dense defensive system. Ukrainian forces are pushing back hard, but the broader trend is a slow compression of the defensive belt that anchors the Donetsk region. Kostiantynivka matters because it sits on a chain that connects to larger hubs like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. If pressure continues, it becomes less about one city and more about the integrity of the entire defensive line. Now, here's where things get more modern in a very uncomfortable way. The information space is getting increasingly synthetic. Russian state linked outlets and defense channels have been circulating battlefield imagery that intelligence assessments suggest may be digitally altered or AI enhanced. The purpose is not subtle, it's about projecting momentum, even when the front line is static or contested. Flag raising clips, claimed advances, and visual proof of territorial gains are being used to reinforce a narrative of inevitability. In a war where perception shapes external support and domestic morale, that layer is becoming almost as important as physical terrain. Inside Russia, security services are also emphasizing internal threat narratives. There are reports of intercepted plots involving arson attacks and other sabotage planning tied to external instruction channels. At the same time, Moscow has reported drone interceptions near the capital region itself. Even when these incidents are limited in scale, they contribute to a broader sense that the home front is no longer insulated from the war. There is also a quieter but important economic strain building in the background. Aviation data shows a growing portion of Russia's commercial fleet is grounded. Maintenance constraints, spare parts shortages, and long-term sanctions pressure are forcing airlines to park aircraft at higher rates, especially among carriers reliant on Western-built planes. Major state-linked airlines are holding together better, but smaller carriers are absorbing much of the stress. Over time, that translates into reduced capacity, higher costs, and fewer buffers in a system already under pressure from fuel disruptions and logistics constraints. Even the air defense and strike environment reflects this layered conflict. Russia continues to launch large-scale drone and missile salvos against Ukraine, while Ukraine intercepts most incoming systems, but still faces periodic impacts on infrastructure. At the same time, Ukraine's own long-range strikes are increasingly designed not just to damage equipment, but to stretch Russian defense networks thin across thousands of kilometers of depth. Thanks for listening and being part of this growing community. If you found this valuable, I'd really appreciate you leaving a review or sharing a quick comment. It helps others discover the show. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack at restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with analysis on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Have a great day. We appreciate you being here.